The second book of Esdras, chapter 13, starting at verse 35. But he shall stand upon the top of Mount Sion, and Sion shall come, and shall be shown to all men, being prepared and builded, like as thou sawest the hill graven without hands. In this my son shall rebuke the wicked intentions of those nations, which for their wicked life are fallen into the tempest, and shall lay before them their evil thoughts, and the torments wherewith they shall begin to be tormented, which are like unto a flame, and he shall destroy them without labor, by the law which is like unto me. And whereas thou sawest that he gathered another peaceable multitude unto him, those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoner out of their own land in the time of Hosea the king, whom Salmanassar the king of Assyria led away captive, and he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land. But they took this counsel among themselves, that they would leave the multitude of the heathen, and go forth into a further country, where never mankind dwelt, that they might there keep their statutes, which they never kept in their own land. And they entered into Euphrates by the narrow places of the river, for the Most High had shown them signs, and he held still the flood till they were passed over. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely 1.5 years, and the same region was called Arsareth. Then dwelt they there until the latter time. And now when they shall begin to come, the highest shall stay the springs of the stream again, that they may go through. Therefore sawest thou the multitude with peace. But those that be left behind by thy people are they that are found within my borders. Now when he destroyeth the multitude of the nations that are gathered together, he shall defend his people that remain, and then shall he show them great wonders. Peace be unto you, brothers and sisters. Peace be unto you. This is Elder Youngman, and the name of tonight's message is, where did they come from? Where did they come from? So if this was a normal November 22nd, Thursday, I'd be wishing you all a happy Thanksgiving. And you know, we've always got a reason to give thanks. We've always got a reason to give thanks because our Father still loves us. He never forsook us. Yahshua, his son, he sent his son to redeem us from our own sin, our own wretchedness. So there's always a reason to give thanks. Though I don't think that the holiday as we know it really speaks to that at all. The imagery that we're given with regards to this holiday is always of the Puritan settlers that came here for religious reasons, and you know, their first encounter with the people that they considered or called Indians, because they didn't know where they were. You know, this is basically the depiction of, you know, the Indian warriors coming and meeting with these pilgrims, and then they sat down and then they had a meal together. But no one ever really addresses where these Indians, Native Americans, came from. And it's always just depicted as the meal itself. It's not really a depiction of what happened afterwards. It's not really a depiction of the brutality, the cruelty, the malice that was, you know, that was observed, you know, during the time that the two cultures even came together. It was noted that these people were sweet. These people would help out in any way. These people fed them. These people took them in. And all the time, the settlers were trying to figure out how to steal their land from them, how to subjugate them, to get them to work the land. All of the time this was going on. But the main point of the scripture that I just read is really a focus on who these people were. Where did they come from? And this reading that I did was out of the book of 2nd Esdras. Now, 1st Esdras was more of a history book where the prophet Ezra, you all know him if you're still, with the Christian faith, you know him as the scribe that came back to the land of Israel when Nehemiah rebuilt the wall. Now, this was a very long, drawn out effort. I did some writing on this, in my most recent book, The Corruption and Planned Destruction of Yahweh's Creation. I covered this period of time where it highlighted the difference between the Gentile kingdoms and the indigenous kingdoms of the world. So starting with Cyrus, these indigenous kings went to rebuild the land of Jerusalem. But even before the Babylonians pulled what was left of the Hebrew people, which would have been 2 tribes and the Levites that made up the southern kingdom of Israel, the top 10 tribes that went the way of Jeroboam, that went to pagan rituals. When you read the lineages of Israel, the 2 tribes split under Rehoboam, who was Solomon's son. So when we're talking about the Native Americans and we're talking about the reading of the scripture describes the 10 tribes that were taken away by the Assyrians. This was before the Babylonians, and then dispersed throughout the known world. Now, you got to understand, 1st and 2nd Esdras were taken out of the Bible canon. Now, what the 2nd book of Esdras is a prophecy book. And this particular passage of scripture that I read speaks to the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom and what they did after being dispersed into these heathen, though indigenous, heathen nations. So they took counsel among themselves and they decided to leave as a group these heathen worshipers. Now, that would not have happened under the Gentile kingdoms because, those 2 things were different. The indigenous kingdoms, they worshipped in the way of Nimrod, but they were not physical Gentiles. Judah and Benjamin went into captivity under the Gentile, physical Gentiles, descendants of angels and women. So their experience was a lot different than, the 10 kingdoms of the north. Now, what happened is they migrated into what we would call the Americas. The land was called Arsareth. So this is the completion of the story of the land bridge. These are the people that came across the land bridge into the Americas, and then the nations of the Native Americans or the Indians or whatever we want to call them, the Apaches, the Sioux, the Choctaw, the Blackfoot. So this entire land was settled, and it was done by our brothers. the 10 tribes that were run out of Israel, the northern kingdom, under the Assyrians. So where did they come from? They came from the same place that we came from, just by a different route. So what we have to recognize here, we just completed 3 messages on Gentile think and Gentile speak. I don't think that the holidays themselves, I mean, let's just forget Thanksgiving by itself. The holidays in and of themselves, because you know what's next. We're going to talk about Christmas. But anyway, Gentile speak and Gentile think is why you only get bits and pieces of this story. Gentile speak and Gentile think is why you only get bits and pieces of your own story. You're finding it out in pieces, who you are, where you came from, how you got to where they got you from. Why it is the Spirit is so strong inside of you that even though you're misguided, you'll get up and run through a church, throwing cartwheels, and it's just different. It's just different. But basically what's happened with this story is a combination of Gentile speak to describe it, but the end result comes from another message that I did, the pattern of the angels. Now, if anyone has been listening for a period of time, you understand what the pattern of the angels is. And if you think about it, if you get into the history books and you look at what happened to the Native Americans over here, it fits the same pattern. These were our brothers. These were our brothers that the Gentile nations came over here, killed the men, raped the women. That's the pattern of the angels. That's conquest. That's assimilation. That's ethnic cleansing when it's done between Gentile nations. See, it was a horrible thing that happened in Serbia and Chechnya and all of them. Oh, it's ethnic cleansing. But see, when it has to do with the indigenous peoples of the earth, it's just assimilation and conquest. Because, it couldn't just be that these people were on their land living in a way that suited them. They had to be brought up to the standard of the Gentile, so that some Gentile somewhere would get rich off of them being brought up. But in the meanwhile, you've got the history books that are chock full of butchering, diseases. I mean, you gotta understand, these people were cursed. So when you came into contact, when the indigenous came in contact with the Gentile, there was a curse on them. So if you got within a certain proximity to them, you're gonna die anyway. Diseases, the smallpox that was put into the blankets and given to these indigenous peoples. So again, what are we celebrating when we celebrate Thanksgiving? What's really being celebrated, folks, is the land. They're giving thanks for the land. They're giving thanks. They're reminiscing on what it took to get this land. And thanks is being given for the slaughter of yet more Hebrews. Because that's what your Native Americans were when they got here. These were the lost tribes, the lost 10 tribes of the nation of Israel. Now, to think for a second that this is new knowledge, that's naive. Hollywood has made movie after movie after movie where they've made reference to the Native Americans being the lost tribes. Two of them. Let's see. There was a Western movie. Well, there was a couple of Western movies, older Western movies, because they don't tell on themselves as much, quite so much anymore. But the most recent one that made a direct reference to this particular scripture was 1492, the story of Columbus, the big epic motion picture. When they were talking about, well, how do you know that you're not going to run off of the side of the side of the earth? The person that played Columbus made reference to Ezra. So they know this stuff. I mean, don't think that, they didn't know. Trust me, they know. And if you pin some of them down and you talk to them about it and you ask, well, how come? Well, why is it that, you guys, you didn't press to get this put into the history books. The first thing they'll tell you is that they're not responsible for you finding out who you are. But anyway, that's a whole nother discussion. Check out this sound clip.
Well, this here's my new bronc buster. This is my daughter, Catherine. Shalom Alaikum, Jackson 2 Bears.
Mr. Baloo, what's the use of saying Shalom Alaikum to me? I'm a full Sioux Indian. I'm not one of the chosen people.
All right, go ahead being stubborn if you want.
Well, I ain't stubborn.
Oh, not much you ain't. You know, according to an ex-congressman of these United States I heard give a lecture at the Chautauqua this winter, Indians is the lost tribe of Israel, but he won't admit it.
Just ain't true.
He was an ex-congressman of these United States, I tell you.
Oh, Papa, maybe he was mistaken.
Oh, no, he was not. Jackson just got a mean, stubborn streak in him is all. I brought Mr. Bernstein, the telegraph operator, out here from town last month, and he stood right where you're standing now, and he talked Hebrew at Jackson for 10 minutes by my watch, and Jackson pretended he didn't understand a word. Now, I call that stubborn.
Well, I didn't understand a word.
You see what I mean? Now, you get that trunk down out of there. I'll get the sergeant.
Superstition. I believe the Indies are no more than 750 leagues west of the Canary Islands.
How can you be so certain?
The calculations of Toscanelli, Marin de Tir, Esdras.
Esdras is a Jew.
So what's worse?
2 minutes, and already you're a bad man.
For telling the truth?
Yes. How can you be so certain?
The calculations of Toscanelli, Marin de Tir, Esdras.
Esdras is a Jew.
So what's worse?
2 minutes, and already you're a bad man.
For telling the truth?
So these folks have known. They make movies about it. They play at it. They, just kind of poke fun at it. But they know who the Native Americans were. They know who we are. This was just another in the long list of genocides that the Gentile has put on the indigenous peoples of the earth. And this fits itself right back into the pattern that was taught to them by their fathers, the angels. I mean, according to the internet here, between 80 and 100 million Native Americans died between what we see in the pictures with the Pilgrims landing and today. 100 million. So if you want to add that to the Hebrews that were taken out of Africa, that's another 110 million. So it's kind of, it's kind of sick, actually. We've been brought up and led to believe that we're doing something that honors our Father. And we're sitting around here with our little cardigan sweaters on and our little ties and, roasting our little turkeys and having our greens and all that sort of stuff. And we're celebrating the death of 100 million of our brothers. That adds to the total of basically 220 million Hebrews dead because of interactions with the Gentiles in the earth. So it puts a little bit of a different spin on our Turkey Day, as we call it. It's it's kind of hard just to let that go when you're awake. And I mean, we can spin it any way that we want. We can try to look at it through a different light and try to redefine it. But we understand the people that came up with the holiday, they are celebrating in the midst of the death of all of our brothers that were over here. The scripture supports it. It says that we would fall by the edge of the sword. And even the northern kingdom couldn't escape it, even by coming over here. We're sitting right now in the seat of Satan.
Scientists may finally have an answer to what caused the Little Ice Age of the 17th century. A new study claims that roughly 50% of a global cooling effect during that era was caused by the loss of 90% of 60 million indigenous lives during European colonization of the Americas.
Most sources point towards a number of 6 million people, like indigenous people living in the Americas. So from 60.5 to 6 million people, that's how we then arrived at the 90% depopulation.
According to the study, Christopher Columbus kicked off European colonization when he landed in 1492. 55 million indigenous people across the Americas died over the next century, through events like genocide and disease. That removed millions of carbon producers from the equation and left an estimated 56 million hectares of land vacant.
This population factors a substantial amount of agriculture. That obviously then had an impact on land management. So there was not enough workforce available to actually manage these fields anymore, which means forest returns or natural vegetation returns.
Nature then reclaimed that land, and the massive jump in plant life and photosynthesis absorbed 7.4 petagrams, or 7 billion metric tons of carbon from the atmosphere, and converted that to oxygen and sugar. Those factors resulted in a cooling of the atmosphere. Winters in the Little Ice Age averaged 2 degrees colder than the modern era.
We can't really even talk about apologies or moving forward until we see that full accountability, and boy, someone's got to account for this.
Dr. Pamela Palmater is a well-known activist and faculty member at Toronto's Ryerson University. She told Global News that population figures supported by science have a high value, and Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission should take note.
This report substantiates what, the chair of the TRC said, that it wasn't just cultural genocide that Canada committed here. It was also physical and biological. This kind of, scientific hard data shows just how extensive the genocide was, and that means something different for Truth and Reconciliation. There's never been a real accountability for what happened. We just say, we had these good policies and oops, they went wrong. Instead of actually saying, this many people died. This is what we did. These are the people that we sterilized. These are the people that we scalped. These are the people that we murdered. And here's the impact to the earth, to the people, and to us. What does it mean for us as a society?
And the real reason that these holidays are propped up and pumped up so much really doesn't have anything to do with goodwill. It definitely doesn't have anything to do with the Father. And we will cover that one. This one's gonna really freak you out. But really what we're celebrating and what all the hype is about is commercialism. They want you spending your money on gifts and cardigan sweaters and turkeys and filling up in the supermarkets and spending all of your money in worship of these holidays that have been set up for us by the empire that we serve. So these are the national holidays, and we still follow the Roman traditions with a lot of these holidays. So folks, come on out from among them. I mean, we're not just talking about moving yourself into a remote location. We're not just talking about separating yourself from customs and things like that. No, we're talking about a whole way of life, a whole matrix that's been given to us that we've taught to our children. And I mean, that's probably one of the hardest things about the truth, is that you've taught your children these things. But the world is coming. They're going to appreciate the truth more so than these empty holiday gestures. And that was one of the hardest things for me, was dealing with the expectations that I set up in my ignorance with my own children, and then weaning them off of that. So where I'm at right now, I can't do the lies anymore. I can't participate in this anymore. Our Father has called for us to come out from among her. He said it right in Jeremiah, the book of Jeremiah, 10th chapter, starting at the 2nd verse. Second verse. Learn not the ways of the heathen. But now, at the end, when he's waking us up, when he's revealing this truth, he's doing it in such a way that you really have to make a choice. Once you understand what this is, what we've been subject to, what we're participating in, you have to make a conscious choice to say, okay, I'm going to reject this knowledge, and I'm going to reject the directions in the scriptures, and I'm just going to stay, a part of this fallen Gentile world. And honestly, how many of us are prepared, or how many of us are ready to just give this thing up and say, I'm about the Father. These holidays are pagan holidays. He commanded us not to learn the ways of the Gentiles nor celebrate their customs. So how many of you, if he came down here, well, forget if he came down here, because when he comes down here it's too late. But the scriptures are calling for us to make our choice now. How many of you are prepared to choose the Father's way? How many of you are prepared to forsake this life, this way that the Gentiles have given us? And I'm willing to venture that it's not too many, because you lose friends over this type of stuff. Your family doesn't approve of this type of stuff. So people start unfriending you on Facebook over this type of stuff. I'm keeping a list of how many Facebook friends I've lost since I've been in this truth, and it's getting kind of long. But my Father, Father Yahweh, Most High, He has to come first. He has to come before my comfort. He has to come before the people that I'm able to talk to. He has to come before my wife, my children. He has to come before everything. There's nothing in this world that can come before my Father. So that's the choice that's before you. And we really need to think about how many of us are actually going to choose to go with the Father. How many of us value what's unseen enough to do what's necessary to hear, well done, my good and faithful servant, and not hear, depart from me, I never knew you. So that's the message, folks. I hope that I hope that it's enlightened you. I hope you've gotten something from it. So Elder out.